Welcome back, everybody. We're going to dive further into the discussion of trying to restore fiscal sanity in Washington. With Republicans set to take control of the House, there are now going to be lawmakers in the majority thinking about doing the unthinkable, balancing the budget. How about that? That's a unique idea. Well, joining us right now is one of the most important voices on fiscal sanity. He's a member of the House Budget Committee and a congressman from the great state of California, Congressman Tom McClintock. Sir, great to have you on the show.
Great to be on the show, John. Thanks for having me.
You have been fighting for fiscal sanity for a long time. Next year, with Republicans getting back in control, there's a big chance to start harnessing the runaway spending. One place I know you've been focused on, getting rid of earmarks. Somehow they creep back into the budget process. Tell us what that process looks like, getting rid of them for good.
Well, earmarks are simply the process in which individual congressmen direct spending to their pet projects in their districts, or they make grants to favored supporters. All of that bypasses the merit-driven competitive process that we have in law. What happens is they encourage corruption by combining the power to appropriate with the power to spend. They bypass that open merit-driven competitive requirements for awarding federal contracts. They undermine federalism by turning the federal budget into a grab bag for local pork projects. And they encourage log rolling, utterly reckless spending bills.
Yeah, and we saw the damage they can do as runaway spending got going under the Democratic House. How committed are your other colleagues in the Republican majority to making sure that earmarks don't see the day of light or the light of day in the coming Congress?
Well, in 2011, when Republicans took the majority of the House, we banned them. And for a decade, earmarks were not allowed in the House of Representatives. Unfortunately, this year, Republicans voted to bring them back. So that complicates matters enormously. Excessive spending, printing trillions of dollars we don't have, has run up the biggest debt in our history. It's ignited the worst inflation in 40 years. It's brought on an economic recession. The next Congress is going to have to learn to pronounce the word no. And earmarks just make that job much harder. That's why Tom Coburn called them the gateway drug to spending.
That's right. He did indeed. There's an interesting dynamic in the American economy. This year, we generated a record $5 trillion in tax revenues, in part because the Trump tax cuts grew the economy. It seems to me most Americans think we certainly can live within a $5 trillion spending plan. Do you think the chance of getting to a balanced budget under that sort of revenue is possible in the next few years?
Well, of course it's possible. You have to learn to pronounce the word no. Right. Is it likely? That remains to be seen. But at some point, reality is going to impose itself on us, whether we like it or not. Whenever the government spends a dollar, it's already decided to tax that dollar. The only question is whether it takes it from current taxes, future taxes by borrowing, or inflation by printing money. Those are the only three possible ways that government spending can be paid for. So it all comes down to that. One of the problems with earmarks is not just the amount of money they spend, it's the log rolling that goes on, the greasing of the skids, if you will, for these massive spending bills that end up getting passed, not because members think it's right for the country, but because they think it's right for their district. That's one of the evils of earmarks.
Yeah, it is remarkable. Local preferences over fiscal discipline time and time again. We have an economic team led by Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. They got inflation wrong the first time. Now they're saying, hey, it won't be as bad next year. Trust us. Your assessment of the Biden economic team and their projections for 2023.
Well, their projections have been consistently wrong. And the reason is because their policies are causing this. Milton Friedman pointed out very correctly that inflation is at all times a monetary issue. It is what we all learned in Econ 1. It is too many dollars chasing too few goods. What did these rocket scientists like Yellen do? Well, they've suppressed productivity through huge increases in regulatory burdens, not to mention the lockdowns that the left imposed in so many states during the COVID hysteria, less productivity, and then you print trillions and trillions of dollars that we don't have. So you flood the market with new dollars. You suppress productivity. Of course, you're going to get rampant inflation, and it will continue until these policies are reversed.
Yeah, it's simple economics. There's no doubt about it. A century and a half ago, Congress created a thing called the Holman Rule, which gave the House, on a simple majority vote, the ability to defund an individual bureaucrat, program, or federal spending department that didn't comply with Congress's wishes. In 2017, Republicans brought it back, but really didn't effectively use it. Do you think the Holman Rule becomes a surgical spending knife for the new Republican Congress in 2023?
I certainly hope so. I think it's a very important tool that we'll have at our disposal. Remember, the Constitution, the government cannot spend a single dollar unless the House of Representatives says it can spend that dollar. All spending bills originate in the House. And that's why Republicans are going to have to be very stubborn right now in bringing spending back under control before it completely bankrupts our country. Because history is screaming this warning at us. Countries that bankrupt themselves aren't around very long, because before you can provide for the common defense and promote the general welfare, you have to be able to pay for it. And the ability of our country to do so is now coming into question.
Yeah, no, it really is a legitimate question. And not a lot of people, you're one of the few exceptions, that really having that honest conversation about how we get back to that sanity. There's a moment in this process where we get the chance to go back to regular order and budgets are passed. Do you think Republicans will stop all these little side deals and CRs and get back to the way Americans budget for their households, a regular budget, regular order? That's important, isn't it?
Oh, it's very important. As far as what they'll do, well, I can't read minds and I can't tell fortunes. So I don't know what the future holds, except for this. If we continue down the path we're on, we're going to reach a point where we cannot fund the government. And we almost reached that point in spring of 1945. There was a meeting of the Senate Finance Committee the question was, do we raise the debt limit? We were in World War II. Of course, we had to raise the debt limit. But the bipartisan consensus in that meeting, they were worried sick about the fact we had maxed out our tax revenues. The economy couldn't produce anymore. We had maxed out our borrowing capacity. Bond sales for the war were failing all across the country. And they were concerned that continuing down the path we were on would produce a massive inflation and bring down the economy. They were very concerned if we could even continue the war into 1946. Well, when they were having that discussion, the debt to GDP ratio they were facing was actually lower than it is today.
Wow.
Which leads to the question, if we faced a World War II magnitude crisis, could we actually finance our country's defense? And I'm not sure we can.
That is such an important historical moment to remind people, and we are at that abyss again. We got about a minute left, so I want to ask about one question. You mentioned earlier the Constitution is clear. The House is supposed to set spending priorities and make decisions on spending. Joe Biden went out there and tried to spend $400 billion plus to cancel student loans. Supreme Court's agreed to take that case on this month. How important is it for the courts to rein in executive spending without congressional approval?
Oh, it's critically important. It cuts right to the heart of our constitutional separation of powers. By the way, earmarks works the opposite way.
Right.
Under our Constitution, Congress can appropriate money but cannot spend it. The president can spend money but cannot appropriate it. Earmarks and what Biden is doing blur the distinction between these two and combine those powers in the same hands. Well, this was the point of Magna Carta. It's been a settled principle of good governance since then, that the power to spend must be separate from the power to appropriate. Both Biden's actions and earmarks. Biden combines those powers in his hands. Earmarks combine those same powers in Congress's hands. Either way, as James Madison, the father of our Constitution, said, is a formula for corruption and tyranny.
And it sure is the perfect storm for wasting taxpayers' money. Well, one thing I know for sure, sir, Americans are excited to know there's at least one man on the job watching their bottom line. You've been doing that for a long time, and I know you're going to be an important voice next year. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
Great honor to have you on. All right, folks, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of this really important discussion about fiscal sanity in America right after these commercial messages.